Hi, Denardo. How are
Hey,
you?
Howard.
Good to see you.
Good, good. Well, here we are at my father's house.
Yes.
Once again, huh?
Yes, nice to be here.
It's nice. Yeah. We had a lot of good times, good memories here.
We did indeed, yes.
You know, and it's nice that we have this project at Lincoln Center this year and
Yes.
honor him and also the great work you guys did together. So it's great. And we've been having the rehearsals here.
Yes.
You know, and the meetings with everybody and just remembering how it all came together back in 1991.
Yes.
Wow. Doesn't seem that long ago, but, it's gone fast. Yeah. Now, how did it first come together?
Well, where should we start? At the beginning, I guess.
Let's start
All right.
at the beginning.
Let's see. I heard Ornette's record "Dancing in Your Head." I think it was in '75.
Yeah,
it was released,
that's right.
and I'd been listening to Ornette's music since the '60s, all through the '60s. So I was really just a listener, a great fan. And I was working on Saturday Night Live, the original show in 1975. The show was on, and the album came out. And it was a fantastic album. I mean, I was so enthusiastic for this record. I listened to it over and over.
In fact, Prime Time, that band is also on the festival.
I know, which is pretty,
of that group, so
pretty special.
It's amazing. Yeah.
That's a great thing. So I was listening to that, and I was completely in love with that record. I was playing it all the time. I was living downtown in New York, and it was on all the time, a vinyl record, of course. And when I was working on the Saturday Night Live, occasionally I could get in a booking. It was a couple of us who would book the show.
Right.
And it was actually hard to get people to come on the show. Yeah, it was a live television show.
Right.
A lot of musicians were nervous about it.
Yeah, that's true. Different time.
Yeah, so the sound was had to be right, but it was difficult to do. So one of the first people I booked on the show was Ornette with Prime Time.
Oh yeah,
and
I was there. I remember that.
Yeah, and I think that was '76 or '77,
something like that.
Yeah. And we had rehearsals, and so I spent time with Ornette. I spent time with the band, and we met at that time. I think that was really the beginning of the friendship.
I remember that day because we rehearsed in the afternoon.
Yes.
And I think we rehearsed 2 songs.
You did
right?
rehearse 2 songs,
right?
yes.
And Milton Berle was hosting that night.
Yes. Right.
But I think they ran long in some of the skits that night, and we were only able to perform 1 song.
I heard
That's
about that.
That's what I remember. Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
But I think there was one song, but I mean, it was great. I mean, the performance was fantastic.
Killed.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And that was that Ornette's television debut? Had been on with the Prime Time or with another group?
Yeah, I mean, he may have been on TV before then, but I don't remember. That would have been
like in the 60s.
Probably in the 60s if he was, because I had really been with him most of the late 60s on, and I don't remember being on TV or anything live.
Do you have any video of Ornette from that period?
There's some stuff, but mostly like say in Europe. Like, you go over there and they may shoot a jazz festival or interview.
Or it could have been a news.
A lot of news broadcasts.
Yeah.
Definitely no live TV shows.
Right. So this was a live show from Rockefeller Center, broadcast nationally. Yeah. And that was the first time.
That was a great thing.
Yeah, that was the first time.
Music on, for just the general population.
Exactly. Yeah, it was great. So that was the first time we met, and we did that show, and then that was '77, and then I was working with David Cronenberg really about the same time. I started working with David because the first film I did with David Cronenberg was The Brood. It was 1978, so it was actually around the same period, and then I did a few more films with him. And
but now, had you been doing films prior to working with him?
Not really.
Yeah. Okay.
I did a lot of documentaries, and I did like short films, nature films, and things like that. And I did radio and television. And then Cronenberg made Naked Lunch in I think around 1990, right? and we recorded it in '91. And of course, once I started working on the idea of writing music to Naked Lunch, I actually took a long train ride. I was in Italy, read the book, studied the book, and I was looking for any reference really in the book to music, and it wasn't very much, frankly. And apparently Burroughs wasn't a real big music guy, but he was in Jijuka with Ornette when Ornette recorded with the master musicians of Jijuka.
Yep. Early 70s.
In the early 70s. And Robert Palmer was
Right. And which was on that Dancing in Your Head record.
It was on Dancing in Your Head.
The other side of the record.
Exactly. It was on the B side. And what I was looking for with Naked Lunch when I started studying Burroughs' work, I was looking for a connection between jazz, bebop jazz, because it was the late 50s. And that was, Parker was the biggest influence, Charlie Parker was of that period. And I was looking for that connection and Morocco, which Burroughs called Interzone. It was his fictionalized world that he created called Interzone, but it was really set in Tangier and Morocco. So I was looking for the North African American jazz. And when I played David Cronenberg that track from Dancing in Your Head, Midnight Sunrise. When I played him Midnight Sunrise, he said, "That's the Interzone national anthem." You found the connection.
Yeah.
So I called Ornette. He was
it's true. You couldn't get any more connected between Jijuka, and they had their whole orchestra with their horns.
40 musicians.
40 musicians.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wasn't on that trip, but I remember when my father went up there to those mountains, and just how magical he thought it was, and it really came back, energized, because it just really confirmed that music was for healing for him.
Yes.
And that's all he talked about.
Yeah, Jijuka's in the Sufi tradition, and there is a healing aspect to it, to the music. And actually, I went to the village a couple of years ago, and when you hear the music live in that village, you do feel good. I mean, so
it's something.
In the same way that when you listen to any good music or Net's music, any music of real quality, it makes you feel better. It has a healing quality to it, and so that recording that he did, really, that connection that he made, really started the process. And then before I actually got to the phone call to Ornette, he was in Europe playing at the time. I was listening to these Charlie Parker, called the Benedetti recordings.
Now, what is that?
It's an Italian jazz enthusiast in the late 50s who recorded Parker in clubs, mostly in New York, and he had a wire recorder. And he was just a fan. He would drag this thing into a club. Nobody stopped. He just had a microphone. And while the band was playing, he would just stick the microphone up like that into Parker's horn. And he made all these, they're kind of snippets. They're like 40 seconds or a minute and 5 seconds. And they're just a lot of his soloing, improvisation. And they had this whole collection. And they eventually came out on a CD, and I had the CD. And it was right at the period where I was getting into digital electronics. I've always been interested in electronics in the studio. And around this time, I got hold of an instrument called the synclavier, which was a digital computer. And it had a sampling aspect to it, which was really early on. And I was taking the Benedetti and sampling it and looping it and writing over it, writing other pieces. And a lot of the Parker recordings were in a very fast time, like all in 16th notes, in a very fast tempo.
Right.
And I wanted to make a connection between the colonialism of Morocco, of the African English aspect of it, because Interzone is set in this kind of somewhat genteel kind of colonial world in Morocco. And so I started writing these slowed down kind of tango dance pieces and had the Parker playing. So I played that for Ornette. I met Ornette. I called Ornette. He was, of course, he knew Burroughs, and he was really intrigued about it, and he wanted to. So we met in London in a hotel room. I remember in a hotel room in London, and I played him the Parker record, the Benedetti stuff. With some of my piano music of the slowed down versions. And he knew all the Parker solos.
Oh, yeah,
and
I
in
bet
the
he did.
hotel room,
Yeah.
he was playing them. He said, what do you
Right.
want me? I could play
Right,
that. If you want, I could play all. And he was playing this in the hotel room.
Yeah.
We turned it on.
Yeah, I
And
know
then-
it's rare. You know, he wouldn't play that way and play those solos normally.
I
But he
know.
knew them all.
But he knew them,
and
yeah.
sometimes, like when we rehearse,
Yes.
he would make a reference for something and just didn't, then
Right.
it's like, okay. So,
Yeah, he
there's a
was so
reference.
familiar with that repertoire. And so I said, well, he was saying, think about it. I said, do you want to, I thought it'd be really interesting if he recreated some of the Parker stuff. So it would be kind of a homage to the Parker and to the period and everything. And I knew that he loved that. So the next day he said, I thought about it. I mean, those recordings are fantastic, and I don't want to redo them. He said, I'll just write my own,
Oh, yeah.
what would have been bebop tunes from the late 50s that I think would be right. So he wrote Right Man and Bug Powder and Ballad for Joan, and he wrote these beautiful trio pieces.
Right.
And that's where you came in.
Right.
So the trio.
Well, now I could have told you that's what he was going to do. Because, no, number one, he loved to write new music.
Right.
And number two,
Yeah.
he just never really revisited the past. I don't know how many times people have wanted him to play music from the classic quartet.
Right.
Would never do it.
Right.
And what he would do would write a new program of music for almost every concert.
That's right.
That's what he was interested in.
You're absolutely
You know what I mean?
right.
So we'd have to learn a whole new program.
Yes.
Even if he wouldn't play stuff he played last year or last month. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if he was like, no, I'll write something.
I know. Ornette was a composer.
Yeah.
I mean, he was principally, he thought of himself like a classical composer.
Right.
And we're going to hear some of his chamber music,
Yeah.
which is fantastic.
Yeah, that's
Skies of America is the most beautiful piece for symphony orchestra, and it was played at Lincoln Center with the New York
right.
Phil, and Kurt Mazur conducted, one of the great European conductors. So, I mean, that part of him was always part of his music life.
That's how he described himself. When people asked him what he did, he said composer.
Yeah, he was a composer.
Yeah.
But jazz was a way to get his music out there.
Right.
To be able to play music and have a living playing, be able to play music. So that's the route that he take. But he never stopped composing.
Right.
He was always there as a composer. So
So he wrote those pieces.
he wrote those. He wrote the trio pieces. Which you played with Bar Phillips. He was living in a medieval city in France. Bar.
Right. I remember we were trying to find Bar to
We were
play
trying to
bass.
find Ornette, recommended him. And actually, I think I went to Charnett. I talked to Charnett because Ornette mentioned Charnett, just to talk to him. And I went to Charnett, but he was booked. He wasn't really available.
Right.
So that didn't really work out with Charnett at that time. But Charnett did when we did live performances, he was there in London and in Belfast and Tokyo. I think he came to Tokyo too. So anyway, so that was really how it evolved. How Ornette came into the project. I essentially wrote the score at that point and then brought his trio pieces into it and his improvisation with the orchestra, which was done in a very kind of special way, I thought, because Ornette would never he'd always find the person in the orchestra to play with. It could be like a violist or a cellist or a second trombone. He'd always, because he was looking for that jazz connection, even though it was the London Phil. I think there was maybe 65, 70 piece orchestra, but he'd zero in on one person and he'd play to them.
Yeah. That's interesting. Wow. If I remember, it was a huge studio, and where we had the orchestra set up.
Yeah, we were at Wembley.
Yeah. And I know you were trying to get him to relate to different aspects of the music, and also to not be influenced sometimes by certain things, and just kind of directing.
Right.
I remember that. That was an interesting recording process.
I would try to get him to play to you. Sometimes I would put you in a booth and have you play not double or triple time, but quadruple time.
Oh, yeah, really fast.
To the orchestra, yeah. And then I would put that in his earphone, because as soon as I turned that off, he'd play really slow.
So if the orchestra had a slow part, he was playing
He would play really slow. But what I wanted him to do, because
Yeah.
I was still into this Parker bebop
energy. You wanted that energy.
Yeah. And
well, that's one thing. He did like a fast tempo.
Yeah.
He'd always say, "Let's go," and he would zoom. And I would try to catch him. Yeah.
The only reference I found in Naked Lunch to music was Burroughs had a little phrase, "cocaine bebop." That was his phrase.
Okay.
So there's energy there.
It was probably fast. Yeah. I know my father and Burroughs met up in 83, 84 down in Texas. They'd opened up this Caravan of Dreams Cultural Center.
Yeah.
And Burroughs came down there. And I remember he and my father got together, and Burroughs was doing like a reading or something. And I remember they were there together. So, they spent a little time together in Fort Worth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They definitely had a connection.
Yeah.
And I mean, Ornette's great album, The Shape of Jazz to Come, and the publication of Naked Lunch is the same year, 1959.
Okay.
So that's
a lot going on.
More than coincidence, really, the connection between them and those two great works.
Yeah.
Burroughs and Geisen had this technique called the cut-up technique, where they would cut things up, newspaper articles and magazines, and they'd throw it all up and then they'd pick it up off the floor, and then they'd put the different ideas together in their own way, And a lot of Naked Lunch is this group
Sounds harmonic.
What?
Sounds harmonic.
Yeah, and there's a group of stories in Naked Lunch that can relate in different ways. And I remember watching Naked Lunch, the first time I saw it, I saw the dailies. Now, dailies that's film that's not shot in sequence.
Okay.
And I remember watching the dailies and getting the first inspiration really of the film. And then when I saw the whole film together, it was kind of the same. It hadn't really changed because it was all these different aspects of the story, but interwoven in different ways.
Yeah. It's almost like when a band is playing and one person takes it, other person takes it, and it's cut up in that same kind of way.
Right.
But so you get a lot of information, and your mind is moving.
Yeah.
But it's like a collective energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. The film, it moves like that way.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah. Well, but it sounds like from once you brought Ornette in to once you started recording, it happened pretty quickly. I don't remember the timing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It just seemed like it was the right energy.
Back then in the 90s, those scores happened rather quickly. I think I wrote the piece maybe in maybe 5 weeks, something like that. I have the feeling it was something like that, yeah. And then flew to London. I wrote it in New York, flew to London. I had worked with the London Philharmonic for many years before that, and had done quite a few films, maybe 5, 6, 7 films before Naked Lunch. It started with the film The Fly, which was in 1986, a science fiction film. And so I knew that orchestra pretty well at that point. And we did all these live sessions. Everything was done live. You know, I just brought them all. I love live recording. I bring them all. I love just like the energy of it. I brought them all into a room. It was CTS Studios. It was in Wembley, just outside of London. And we recorded live with Ornette. And
the energy was there. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I love that. I love the energy of that.
Yeah. And when you mentioned The Fly, you know, when I saw that movie, now I understand why, you know, David, it was the right person to capture all that other kind of, you know, the insects and the different creatures and everything.
Some of Naked Lunch came out of The Fly, right?
Yeah. You know, the thing about my father is that he just had his own concept, you know, and you can follow your own concept. You don't have to, as a young person, you know, a lot of people tell you how things should be done, and you think that there's a way that everybody does it, but that's not really true. The way everybody does it is somebody who figured something out and everybody agreed to do it that way. And so he decided, well, let me just try to figure out something else. And so I think, you know, for a musician or any creative person, he always used to talk about the idea. It's really about the idea, not so much about your method and all that. And to get to something pure and something that can lead you to your own resolutions. You know, so it really is about creating the territory you want to be in for yourself. You know, as opposed to trying to accept, you know, whatever the convention is. Not that you don't need to know convention or understand what's going on, but you know, the rest of the space is so broad. You know, you shouldn't limit yourself. And I think it's hard for like a young creative person to understand sometimes, because especially now, it's even worse in the digital world we live in, because everything's so packaged for you. Like say a musician comes in and they think on their hard drive, they have every sound in the world. You know what I mean? And they have every rhythm in the world, and they can just go and they can punch in this and that, and they made a beat, they made a track. You know what I mean? But now, that's music, but whatever they're using as ingredients, somebody's already put their hands on and created that. So they're getting something second, third, however many generations later, as opposed to that acoustic musician that sound is coming from their heart and their hands. So that's all I'm just saying. You know,
master your art, but learn the rules before you can break them and go on. I mean, Ornette was a master musician who created his own world of music. I would say that he also found great collaborators in you and Don Cherry, other members of of his, you know, Charlie Hayden. I mean, he found people that were like-minded. I think this is an important thing, whether it's music or working in film or whatever you want to work with, is to find the people who are like-minded, have a good sense of
and like
creativity.
They would rehearse. They probably rehearsed for a year or two before they ever played in public. You know, so it's really about creating together, finding that.
That's right. Energy. It wasn't something that just happened, you know, or overnight.
Or commercial, you know, thinking, all right, we have a job. No. So it's, but, you know, the good thing about this whole festival, you know, is that we have all these aspects of his work. You know, I particularly like the collaboration with you. To hear him playing against an orchestra. I mean, that's just so special and so unique since, you know, he usually wasn't in that context. And you just hear all these worlds come out of his horn.
I know.
I mean, so I'm happy that that's there.
He was real happy doing those sessions, as I recall. They were really a lot of fun. I think he was a little nervous at first, I think, coming in, because here was this big orchestra all laid out, and there he was, you know. And that over the course of a few hours, he just warmed up, and it just got better and better and better. And after 3-4 days, it was just fantastic.
No, you can hear it.
We had such fabulous.
And to me, he sounds so soulful. Actually, you know what I mean? And he brings the energy of that film, I think, into that sound, and how everything was so melodic, you know. And as we're rehearsing now, so we've transcribed some of his solos, which sound like melodies. And so the guys are trying to figure out, you know, we have Henry Threadgill and Ravi Coltrane, and trying to figure out, should they play should they play it solos because they really sound like melodies, or should they just take them as departures? You know,
Right.
so we're finding that balance now.
I think you have to go scene by scene and discover that.
Yeah.
Sometimes he just set the standard for it, and you can go off from that. Other times he played things that are so beautiful to the action that you want to recapture that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You have to just find the balance, you know, almost scene by scene.
Scene by scene.
And even how it relates in, you know, how the scene develops.
Yep.
There's, you know, he did so many beautiful things. So,
yeah, that's good. It's a challenge. We've been rehearsing with the film, you know, to get closer to it.
Yes, I know.
But yeah, so that's fantastic. And then we have the primetime reunion, you know, and getting together after 30 years, and then the night of his chamber music with lots of different pieces.
I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, a lot of, you know, a lot. And then Shirley Clark made a film.
Yes,
Made in
fantastic
America.
documentary.
That's, one has to experience it to see it. So it's amazing. You know, it's gonna be good.
It's gonna be great.
It's gonna be a great week.
Great week.
Yeah. So thanks, Howard.
You too.
Yeah.
Okay.